Hey folks, Randy Newberg here. Another episode of Leupold's Hunt Talk Radio. This is in a special spot. I'm in the U.S. Senate. What you see with all this amazing taxidermy, this is the office of Senator Martin Heinrich from New Mexico, a public land hunter who always asks when I'm here, let's come and talk a little bit. Well, today, he wants to do a full-blown podcast. This is not the normal U.S. Senate office filled with taxidermy and maps. He's got maps everywhere. He's got all kinds of things here that tell you this guy hunts, this guy is on public land, he gets it. So stay tuned. He's been on the podcast before, but today you're going to get to see him. We're going to film this one, and I think it's going to be a great episode. Thanks for being here. Well, Senator Heinrich, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy Senate schedule. We're here. You don't mind if I video your room when
Not
we're
a
done,
bit,
do you?
Yeah.
This is
I try to make this feel as much like New Mexico as I can.
Yeah.
Because I spend more time than I want to spend in Washington,
Yeah.
D.C. And so having the things that I care about back home around me makes it a lot more tolerable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will you send me a picture of that elk that you just
Yeah, you
showed me a
bet.
picture of?
Yeah.
That would make a great thumbnail for this video.
I'm happy to do it.
And
That was a great time. Public land bull.
out in western New Mexico. So you've been on this podcast a time or two, and I thank you so much for that. I thank you so much for all you do for public land advocacy. You're one of those reliable cornerstones that we can count on.
That's why I'm here.
Well, I appreciate that. Where's for our audience who maybe hasn't listened to prior podcasts, where does this hunting passion come from for Senator Heinrich?
You know, I grew up just spending time outside, and I didn't have a mentor, so I tried to learn to hunt when I was young, but I wasn't good at it. But I spent time outdoors all the time. Like I would get out of school, and I would be out until it was dark, or my mom was yelling at me to come home for supper, right? Catching snakes and frogs, and just always loved the outdoors.
Yeah.
And you know, when I was in my 20s, I got into growing my own food, and it was a natural transition to wanting to control like the meat that we had at home.
Yeah.
And at that point in my life, I had friends who did it, and so I had mentors, and that made a giant difference. So I was an adult onset hunter, you know, in my late 20s, and went from never having killed a big game animal to, you know, my kids grew up a few years later entirely on wild protein. Like, didn't know a steak from the grocery store until they were, you know, 10, 12 years old.
Cool. And that brought you, that's carried with you in your career here in DC, representing the good folks in New Mexico.
It's a central part of what makes it worthwhile. I mean, I think most people in this country know how ridiculous politics is at this point in our history. But it's being able to work on something that has durability that I, you know, if we can hang on to this democratic experiment, I believe that the things I've been able to work on will be around for my grandchildren and maybe their children. And that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're in the Senate. You are on the Senate Energy and Natural Resource Committee. You get to see all kinds of interesting things coming through here as it relates to public land and
Absolutely.
conservation and funding and how that gets prioritized.
Yeah.
Is that an eye-opener? Is it?
It's an eye-opener because I think some people take positions that are not grounded in the kind of everyday experience that you or many of my constituents have in Western public lands in particular. You know, when things go sideways, it's usually because people are not grounded in reality, but they are looking at something from a completely abstract point of view.
Yeah.
And that's when we get these ideas like selling off our public lands.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've seen so much of that lately. I mean, it started entering the election cycle last summer.
Right.
And when you talk about the abstract, you hear people say, well, these are just wastelands. Other than military installations, they really have no use or purpose.
Yeah.
And when I hear that, and then I start reading Wall Street Journal articles that are kind of echoing this, I'm like, wait a second, this is completely different than some of the old, if you want to call it, marketing schemes.
And that's what it is, right? Because this idea comes up time and again. We have killed this multiple times. It came up when I was in the House of Representatives over 10 years ago, and it was real. And as soon as it became visceral for people across the political spectrum put it down. Said, we're not having this. These places, in my view, they're the anvil that the American experience was forged on. I mean, if you have a personal relationship with these places, and one of the things that really bugs me is when people say, well, I love our national parks, but we should get rid of those BLM lands. And it's like, those BLM lands are personally important to me. They are the places I took my kids in a backpack when they couldn't even walk yet. They're the places I've harvested, like where my son took his first elk. I mean, those BLM lands matter.
Yeah, and when you hear that in the abstract, it causes me concern because I come here more often than I'd like. This is your office and a couple others are like my sanctuaries. But you quickly realize that when issues are being prioritized back here, there aren't too many who put that connection, or have that connection that puts that up their priority list like you and a couple others do. And it becomes an abstract concept for them. And so if it can become a bargaining chip, or it can be...
or a way to pay for something.
Right. Yeah, and so yesterday, we hear that in the budget reconciliation process, there's supposed efforts that, hey, we're going to use that as a mechanism to maybe sell some public lands. And for a lot of my audience, they're like, well, how does that work? It takes 60 votes in the Senate, and it's like, no, there's procedure, there's process that people can use that. So,
and budget reconciliation for our listeners only takes a majority. So you can do things under budget reconciliation with 51 votes that you cannot normally do as a matter of law in the Senate.
Right, and that's a great explanation because a lot of people will tell me, Randy, you're just so wound up over this. You can't see the forest for the trees. It's going to take 60 votes. Well, here's a perfect example. And 2 weeks ago, I started getting some emails and calls from folks back here of, hey, Randy, we're being asked to figure out what hurdles would be there if we tried to sell some Forest Service land. Because it sounds like there's a big amount of it that they might want to test in the budget reconciliation. I'm like, that's crazy. They aren't that bold. Well, yesterday we find out, and you made a statement on that. I'm thankful that my senator from Montana, Senator Daines, made a pretty strong statement on that. For people out there who don't live and breathe this, are we at this point where this is the closest we've come to a possibility of this happening?
I think we're closer now than we were, back when I was in the House of Representatives and we had this same fire drill, well over a decade ago. And it is, the antidote to this is to have people across the political spectrum, certainly in both parties, who will stand up to this. Like, no matter who raises the issue, Public lands are just one of those issues that make it worth me serving here. And I'm happy to do my part, but we need that from all sides.
Yeah.
That's the key. As long as we can keep conservation and public lands bipartisan, we will be able to stop this kind of craziness.
Yeah, because it seems like every time there's a, if you want to call it a crisis, or there's an event in the bigger landscape of American society, there are certain groups and certain people who want to say, well, how can we attach some of our ideological goals of ridding the American public of their lands to that crisis?
Yeah.
And in today's environment, we're hearing about, well, we're going to do it so we can reduce the deficit or balance the budget. Or even the one that seems to have more strength right now is lower the cost of housing.
Yeah.
And I use where I live in Bozeman, Montana. The average house sells for $900,000. And we have tons of private land
Yeah,
yet
all
to be
around
developed.
Bozeman, right?
And you could go
I've been to Bozeman. It's like you can find public lands fast. You can
Yeah.
get on the road and get to them, but they're not
The
what is driving up the cost of housing in Bozeman.
not at all.
And you see it, the cost of housing in states without public lands is also being driven up simultaneously.
Yeah.
So we need to figure out how to build more houses.
Right.
And we have laws that facilitate, when you have an isolated section of land that is not providing access, it's not providing the services that most of our public lands provide, there is a mechanism to divest of that. And we're working on a section of land outside of Carlsbad, New Mexico right now that is a BLM land that wasn't being used by the public that is going to facilitate housing. That's not what we're talking about. Like, we have mechanisms to do
Right.
that. This debate is not about housing.
Right. And we've had FLTFA, the Federal Land
Transaction
Facilitation Act.
I wrote
That's-
the last version of that.
Okay, yeah, and so it is to identify those kind of parcels.
Exactly.
It's got criteria, it's got a mechanism for what happens with the money, but it's not, it's for better land management.
That's right.
It's not under this false pretense of, well, this is gonna lower the cost of housing. So we see this happening right now, and every day it's like some new weed is sprouting out of
Yeah.
the soil. Someone's fertilizing that soil. And my job is to point out to my audience, here's who's planting the seeds and fertilizing that soil. And you may not want to hear that. You may not agree because you have other priorities. And you might say, well, I guess, on immigration or taxes or abortion or whatever,
Whatever the issue
it's
is.
worthwhile.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to say my number one priority is these public lands. And that's it. And I'm here to give you the facts. I'm here to meet with people like you and others to give a lay of the landscape. And if after all that you still decide, well, hell with it, I guess we don't have public lands, well, okay, that's your decision, but I'm not on that ship.
Yep.
I'm going down with the ship. If
Amen.
that ship's going down, I'm going down with it.
Yeah.
But I'm not here to see it go down.
Absolutely.
I can't separate my experience of living in America from public lands.
Right.
If it weren't for public lands, you and I wouldn't be having a conversation.
I'd be a completely different person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When my parents divorced when I was 10, I'm the oldest of three. My mom's trying to raise us. My dad had to move away for work. And that's right when I was thinking, I'm going to get to be a hunter. That's what I wanted to do my whole life. And here, my whole dream of that would have been shattered and lost if not for the fact I could leave school, walk down to our trailer house, grab my 410, and walk a half mile to public land and hunt grouse.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that people can, people with means can go out and hunt some crazy big elk on a trophy property. I have no problem with that. Mm-hmm. But that is not the public land experience that is so central to my life and so many of the people that I know and respect.
Yeah.
I mean, that public access to public land is it makes a difference in the character of people of all political stripes, especially across the West.
Yeah, yeah, and I know people think that I dwell on it too much. I yell fire when there's no fire. There's always some level of flame and embers on this issue. And there are people who have ideological beliefs, supported by whatever their life experience is, that want to see that become a raging fire.
Right.
And we no longer have these lands.
And we only need to lose once.
Right.
To have that
Yeah. And
change.
That's the important part. And I was talking to one of my staff people this morning, and we're going through these notes of what are the big issues. And one of them is just that. This is not a return back to how it was if it happens. I've never seen a subdivision get converted back to wild land. I've never seen shopping malls get put back to wetland. And so your point of if we lose once, we've lost forever is absolutely true.
Yeah.
And so with all this and seeing what's going on here and just the tenor and change from when I was here last year and when I was here 5 or 6 years ago, things just feel, and maybe I'm wrong, I've only been here for 3 days, but things just feel a little different right now.
Yeah. People are very unsettled. The world of the possible is different. You know, things that people accepted as just part of the American experience are being called into question right now.
Yeah.
Who our friends are and who our enemies are is being scrambled. So this is just a time that is a lot more unsettled than in the past.
Yeah.
And I think that should give us all a pause when I don't think we can just assume that things are going to be fine, they're going to be the way they were. This is a time to stand up and say, I don't care where you are on the political spectrum, this is central to who we are as Americans, and we're going to fight for it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things right now is government efficiency. Mm-hmm. And there's the expenditure side and there's the revenue side.
Right.
And I don't know anyone that I've not talked to one single American who said, boy, I wish my government was more inefficient. I think it's a baseline feeling that everybody wants their tax dollars to be allocated and spent efficiently.
100%.
That's been that way forever.
Right.
So we get into some of these things, and some of the critics of public land say, well, states get a way better return on their public lands. Why don't we manage them like the states? And I know that you've done some things about mining and royalties. And I don't know if you want to get into this, but this gets into this government efficiency. You can't be a critic of how the government manages their assets and then vote to say, well, we're not going to charge market rate for this. We're not going to allow that. We're not going to have competition for, say, conservation leasing compared to other leasing.
That's right.
But the folks who...
Minerals are free in this country
Right.
for mining companies.
Yeah.
On federal land. Our federal grazing leases are a tiny fraction of the cost of state grazing leases. And so that creates a situation where you don't have the revenue to adequately often manage these public lands. And we need to address some of that. I mean, I was able to pass the Good Samaritan Mining Reform Act in the last Congress. I think that was introduced the first time by a Montana senator in 1999.
Really?
So we had to fight for 25 years so that, a local chapter of like a wildlife federation or Trout Unlimited could go in and clean up some of these old mines from 150 years ago and not own all the liability for creating those places in the first place.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that a lot of people do not realize, that under the Hard Rock Mining Act of 1872, do that math, 153 years ago,
in spite of all of the hard rock mineral activity, gold, silver, copper, zinc, lead, but you know, the list goes on and on, they pay a 0% royalty.
That's right.
Most people drive by mine and think, well, at least the government's getting something out of that. They are not.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about you want better land management at the federal level, you have to more than talk about it. So when you introduce bills, such as you have, to change that, the people who fight and argue with you and vote against that concept are the same ones who are over here decrying that the federal government
Yeah.
does not manage their lands very well. They don't get the proper return on those
Yeah.
lands.
Right.
And that seems to be kind of a continual pattern where some people are happy to be the critic, but they never want to
Well, I think
work in the solution.
It's a means to an end, right? Like that argument is not about how those lands are managed, because the reality is it's a lot harder to manage lands for everybody than for, if you own private property, you can just decide what's going to happen on that. You don't have to be answerable to the public. You don't have to balance different constituencies. You don't have to think about like how this impacts hunters and simultaneously how does it impact birders. You know, like you don't have to balance those things.
Right.
The federal land managers do, and the one thing I will say is that, like, if you take that to its logical end, say we transferred all of our public lands to states or counties, I don't know who's putting out the next forest fire.
Nobody.
Because I know New Mexico doesn't have tankers. New Mexico doesn't have helicopters ready to, you know, suck water out of that tank and drop it on the fire or drop retardant. Like we have to now marshal the resources of an entire nation to fight some of these fires.
Yeah.
And none of that's going to happen if those lands get transferred to whoever the subdivision of government is. And that's just one step to the real answer is, why do they want these lands transferred?
Right.
They want them sold off.
Sold.
They want them in private hands.
Yeah.
And then you've got a no trespassing sign on the place where your kids, you know, spent their summer vacations and went trout fishing with you for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, and you've done a better job than I usually do of connecting those dots real easily. And that is...
Because that's the goal.
That is the end goal. And so when people are saying this stuff, it's hard to take them seriously anymore of what their intentions are, because they always say they want better land management. And I would say if I broke down what my audience and what I want and people who I hang out with, they do want better land management.
Yep.
And they want to have access to their public lands.
Right.
It's about that.
It's about that simple.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And when we use the term better land management, so many people want to take that to other places and have a view of it different than most hunters who say, I want healthy, productive landscapes that can support wildlife, can support public land grazing, it can support all kinds of things, but it's done in a productive way.
Right.
And we keep it productive, we give it priority, we give it funding, we give it the infrastructure of people and resources, and we enjoy it, and we get access to it.
Yeah, it's funny because the people that are the loudest to sell off or transfer these public lands, they're never on, you know, my bill I write with the Mule Deer Foundation to, you know, to better manage pinyon juniper woodlands so we have, you know, better habitat.
Yeah.
So that tells you a lot, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you're not part of the solution to better manage these lands, to create better habitat, to support the things that you and I do when, you know, in the fall, when of all the things I could do as a U.S. Senator, there's nothing I enjoy more than when I draw a good tag and I get to spend time with my boys and be outdoors on public land chasing elk. That's about as good as it gets in this life.
Yeah.
And so if you're not part of that, it makes me wonder, well, what are your intentions?
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes they reveal those intentions with maybe not even realizing, like a lot of this lower cost of housing, when you float past them, well, okay, if we're going to do this, how about we put some restrictions and we require that this be high density housing in very small footprints. Well, all of a sudden you get this big long list, you know.
Right.
Or you say, well, you tell me you're only going to dispose of parcels that really have not much value, but somehow that's going to offset the budget deficit. Well, who's going to pay for parcels that really have no value?
Right.
It's contradictory.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't take very long of a discussion with most of these people to quickly smoke out
What the real plan is.
yeah. Yeah. So what are the things you're working on or that you see here that are opportunities and places where progress could be made, or is it at this point it's mostly playing defense?
A lot of what I'm doing right now is honestly playing defense, but I do think we should always take the long view too. And you know, one of the things I've been able to build a pretty good bipartisan coalition around is the Recovering America's Wildlife Act.
Yeah.
And it's always bothered me that we have a national law, the Endangered Species Act, that is basically the emergency room for wildlife, but we knew no primary care. And if we could just find a way to fund, everybody loves their state wildlife agency. If we could fund state wildlife agencies and tribal wildlife agencies to do the early intervention, we wouldn't have to spend nearly as much on endangered species, because they wouldn't get endangered in the first place. They wouldn't even get threatened. A little bit of money in wildlife makes all the difference. I mean, you look at the last 30 years and there's been this giant decline in birds, right?
Yeah.
Well, what birds are not in decline? Waterfowl.
Waterfowl, yeah.
Because duck hunters spend a little bit of their money on habitat every year. You buy a duck stamp and suddenly, you know, they're the exception to the rule. If we had a way to do that for other species, we'd have a lot less fights over endangered species.
Yeah. Land and Water Conservation Fund. I've been meeting with people the last couple days on that one. And we had the Great American Outdoor Act that passed in 2020.
In the first Trump administration?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, for people who don't know, that took the Land and Water Conservation Fund that takes off mostly offshore oil and gas royalties, puts them in an account at least to the tune of about $900 million.
Yep.
And that is split a little bit, kind of equally or close to equally split between the states for, you know, parks and bike trails and hiking trails, and then the other
baseball
half,
diamonds and soccer fields and neighborhood parks.
Yep. And then the other half is kind of a federal, I call it the federal side. It's for acquisitions to solve access issues and can be done through long-term easements or permanent easements. It can be done through fee title acquisition. And so it's been great now to see that that's there and the number of projects that we got done in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Very, very exciting for me. My worry is we have the requirement that a functioning Congress approves these projects. Okay, we've already got the money. We're not taking the money from the American taxpayer. Right. It's already there.
It's there.
It just needs, the projects need approval and funding.
And when the appropriations process breaks down,
right,
you know, that gets called into question.
Right. And just talking to people who have been here a long time, one of the tricks I'm worried might be pulled is, well, we just won't appropriate all of it. Right. And then we'll use the rescission process to pull some of it back to help offset something else. That, which in this whole negotiation of, we think when we enter into these, in you know, every one of these is a bit of a compromise, and you work hard at it and you think, okay, this is what I'm getting on my side. If Congress can use process to empty your side of the transaction, was it really a deal? Was it really beneficial? Right. And so I'm telling my audience, we have to be vigilant in this.
100%.
We can't let this, which has been party agnostic for the most part, public lands and solving landscape problems, who usually those funds end up in the hands of landowners who are good, willing landowners who
Right.
want to also solve it. So there's if there's a win-win in the public land world,
It's a
LWCF
win-win.
is
Yeah.
about as close as you're going to find. We can't let that become,
We can't become complacent.
Yeah.
Because the things that, I mean, conservation is cumulative over time. And we all come from places where 100 years ago, the things that we take for granted did not exist. There wasn't a single elk in New Mexico 100 years ago,
Yeah.
right? They were wiped out.
Yeah.
The number of mule deer, I mean, you could count on your fingers and toes in most national forests in New Mexico.
yeah,
And hunters and anglers got together and said, we can change this.
Right.
And we're willing to put skin in the game. But if you, if you take it for granted, somebody will come along and find a reason to take those accomplishments away,
yeah, and take them
especially if they have monetary value.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Make them. They will privatize them for their own benefit, whether commercial benefit or their own personal use benefit.
Yeah.
And we see that in many instances. And my warning to people is this is happening. These are the kind of things that, as much as you can say, I don't do politics, I hate politics, that's why I don't watch the news, that's why I don't this. Well, some of those who are adverse.
That's when politics will do you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality.
But a lot of people who are adverse to our interests understand that. And so they bring it over to the political arena because,
Right.
one, we're not well equipped to operate there. We're somewhat, I don't know if we'd say the minority, but maybe, well, yeah, we are the minority.
We are now.
Yeah.
I mean,
And we don't play that game. We just inherently, most of the hunters I know are like, I don't like politics. Well, what's the old saying? You're either at the table or your dinner.
you're on the menu.
Yeah. Well, that really is true in
Yeah.
this instance. And the reason I come back here, it's not like I don't have things I'd rather be doing right
Right.
now, is you can't change, you can't try to score or move the ball forward if you're sitting in the bleachers.
That's right.
Or if you're out tailgating in the parking lot.
It's what Teddy Roosevelt said, right? If
Yeah.
you're in the arena, that's the person I respect because they're making a difference. And you don't have to do it all the time, but just dedicate a little bit of your time to talking to your elected leaders and holding them accountable.
Yeah. And that gets me to the next step of how do people do that? So you're a U.S. Senator. What does it take for somebody to get on your radar, if you want to call it that? Is it one concerned citizen, 5 or 6 people call on the same issue or email on the same issue? When does it start reaching the radar of, you tell one of your staffers, find out what's going on there?
These days, I think most elected officials are really pretty attuned, and there are some folks that are disconnected from their constituents, but most of them are really fine-tuned
Yeah.
to their constituents. And you can always email or make a phone call, but even just having the conversation in the world of content, and I say content because I mean kind of everything today, like from cable news to social media to letters to the editor in your local newspaper. Like, elected officials pay attention to that conversation. And so if back home, wherever you are, there is a conversation about people wanting to sell off public lands, that's going to get people's attention.
Yeah.
And so be part of that conversation. Be part, these rallies that we've seen at state capitals,
Yep.
that's getting people's attention in states that, in very diverse, politically diverse
Yep.
states. So just make sure that you're not sitting on the sidelines, not part of that conversation. Because if you're raising your voice for the things that you care about, I guarantee you somehow that's going to end up on the radar screen of your elected officials.
It's good to know. And sitting at the coffee shop complaining or ranting on Facebook is usually not one of those things that's going to get you very far.
Comments on Facebook, no.
Yeah.
But boy, if you're, if you're posting content on some of these social media sites, like when we had so many people who work on our public lands sort of summarily dismissed
Right.
just weeks ago,
Yeah.
and a lot of them went online and told their stories,
Yeah.
that got people's attention.
Right.
I mean, I posted, I was doing a hike with one of my friends, and I was like, hey, hold my phone, I'm gonna do a quick video. And it was just me saying, this is a step, and let me tell you what's gonna happen a few weeks or months from now. And unfortunately, I was right. And I posted that video about public lands, and that getting rid of the managers is a step towards saying that they're not managed well, and
Right.
then they're gonna say, well, we gotta sell them if they're not managed well.
Yeah.
That video on one platform got hundreds of thousands of views.
Yeah.
Who knows how many views it got across platforms. And most of the people who saw it were not in New Mexico. So if you're part of that conversation out there in the ether, it does get people's attention.
Good. Well, that's what I want people to take from all the stuff I do. I mean, if you come to my office in Bozeman, which I hope you do someday, you'll see a why. And it's to create content that inspires people to advocate for public lands access and the resources essential for hunting.
Yeah.
That's as complicated as my life is. And hearing from you, just the small little things they can do to express their concerns and speak for themselves and give voice to the things they love,
Yeah.
it helps dispel the idea of, oh, my voice doesn't matter. That becomes a self-fulfilling.
It does.
If you say, well, I'm not going to do that because nobody listens,
Yeah.
well, guess what? You all here in DC can't look up, well, I can't say look everyone up in the phone book anymore, can I? No one looks up. So that's what we used to say.
When
They're
I
not gonna
first
look
started watching your shows, I mean, they would come in a DVD, right?
Yeah.
Like those days are long gone.
I was telling your staff out front how almost embarrassed I was the first time I came back here and someone said, Senator Heinrich wants to meet with you, and I didn't know who you were. And so I came in, and I'm like, oh, did I do something wrong? And then I see all these antlers, and you had taxidermy. I'm like, what's going on? And then you told me that you watched our content. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I'm like, is someone put him up to this, or what's the deal? So since then, you've been such a great resource for me and your staff. And
Well,
it's
I
super
appreciate
helpful.
everything you do, because it makes the things that I'm able to do here possible. Like when people can get together in Washington, D.C. and pull in the same direction from very different states and very different sort of political backgrounds, you can still get things done that you can really be proud of. And
Yeah.
that's what makes it worthwhile for me to do this. I mean, I can tell you, one of the reasons why I have this sort of refuge in my office is because I'd rather be in New Mexico. Like,
Yeah.
the skies are blue, I've got places I know and love that I can get to quickly. I'm here because I can make a real difference in
Yeah.
the long term.
Yeah, don't you guys recess in August?
We do.
You should move that to September.
Yeah,
In elk
absolutely.
season.
That is, I've,
Why don't you and Senator Dane and a few of you who hunt suggest, let's move our recess to
I like that.
September.
yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, I suspect that a couple of my colleagues do this. People will say, do you rifle hunt? Do you bow hunt? What do you, I was like, I sit down with the Senate schedule and figure out when I can actually apply for a tag. And then whatever that is, that's what I do.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's with a bow, and sometimes it's with a muzzle loader. I don't care.
Yeah.
But yeah, that schedule is what dictates what tags I get to apply for.
Well, I have a far more open schedule than you, so I hate to break it to you, but if you want to have a hunting schedule, doing what I do is probably better than being a U.S. Senator.
It looks pretty good, at least from where I'm sitting. And I love the fact that, when I'm watching your content, when you're in New Mexico, I pretty much know where you are.
Yeah.
Like
Dang.
the places that you hunt, I know why you hunt there, because, one, they're public. There's always access. It's not easy access.
Right.
You have to, use the you
The
know,
boot leather.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
to get into them. And I know precisely, like, I suspect, you know, the place that my oldest son took his first elk, I think is pretty close to where you've shot some of your,
Oh, really?
yeah, your elk hunting content for,
Dang, I'm gonna have to bury a few. What we've started doing now, especially in some places where it's pretty recognizable, we will go get footage from nearby areas
Yeah,
that we've hunted,
right.
and we'll throw that in there as kind of the opening
well, when you
landscape
got
scenes.
when you have the very large array, you know, those big
Yeah.
discs in the background, that's kind of a,
Yeah,
that's a little bit of a tell. It's hard to hide
I
that.
can't replicate the VLA anywhere else. But no, those kind of things of being able to travel the West, where most of the public lands
Yeah.
are. Every place has a story of the landscape, how that story got to be, how that landscape got to be there, how that species got to be there.
Yeah.
And for me, this is, you know, you start getting a lot of gray hair and you realize, you get more reflective, at least I have, of how did this happen that I got to live such a marvelous American life
Yeah.
on these public lands.
Right.
And so you start reading and researching all these stories of how this happened and how that happened. And there's not a landscape I traveled to, from New Mexico to Montana to Alaska to Nevada, that doesn't have some remarkable story of someone before me,
Yeah.
who, even some of them who sat in these halls of Congress, who did things to make it possible for us today.
Oh,
And-
for sure.
And so,
I mean, in New Mexico, Aldo Leopold had such a,
right,
and that's sort of true nationwide, but he spent a lot of time in the Forest
Mm-hmm.
Service in New Mexico, and that's all, you can see his impact on the landscape.
Yeah.
And, you know, something you said that I appreciated a few years ago is like, at a certain point you get, you have more, I think you said more road in the rear view mirror than through the windshield.
yeah, more
Or something like that.
Yeah, you're
I'm paraphrasing.
yeah.
But
Life
the point
is a
like,
series of
when
hunts.
you
and-
realize
yeah.
that, you start asking yourself, how do I like pass this on
Yep.
to my kids, to the next generation? Because this has value. This is worth fighting for.
Right, yeah. Well, I know that you have votes that you have to go and do, Senator, and the fact that you are able to take this amount of time for me and our audience, I can't thank you enough. And anytime I can ever be of help, I appreciate when you text me and ask for my help, whatever that might be. Someday I'm going to convince you to be a little more of a marketer of what you've accomplished and what you've done, your humility and
I
humbleness.
appreciate that.
There's a story I'll tell someday about when you called me about a wilderness area in New Mexico, and I was telling one of your communication people, and they're like, "Oh, that's so cool! I wish he'd tell that story." So we'll tell that someday. But I really thank you for all that you do. You are the true advocate of public land hunting.
Thanks.
Back here. You give it voice. You are the face of it. And
Wow.
I know that you'll be like, oh, shucks, no, I'm just doing my job. But we're glad you're here doing your job.
Well, it's an honor to join you.
Well, thank you.
You're one of those voices I really appreciate.
Well, thank you, Senator. I appreciate it. And folks, he gave us a lot of good advice today. Take it to heart.